In the heart of Nyamra, life looked peaceful from the outside. The village was filled with laughter, evening songs, and neighbors who greeted each other warmly. People believed in keeping family matters private, so as long as a home looked united, no one dared to ask questions. Behind the smiles and greetings, many secrets were buried in silence. Among the quiet mud houses and small farms, there was one home that everyone thought was normal. The father walked with pride, the mother always lowered her eyes, and their little boy followed quietly behind. To strangers it seemed like any other family. But behind their closed door, pain lived louder than joy. At night, when the lamps went out and the crickets sang, that house echoed with arguments, cries, and heavy footsteps. The neighbors sometimes heard muffled screams but chose to look away, telling themselves it was not their place to interfere. They believed respect meant silence. In truth, it was fear that kept them quiet. And so, in that hidden corner of Nyamra, a woman's tears and a child's cries were swallowed by the walls, while the world outside kept pretending nothing was wrong. Do you want me to continue the same way with Outline 2 Imani's introduction, in the same emotional, viral, simple style? Imani was the kind of woman people admired from a distance. She had a gentle smile that could calm storms, and her voice was soft, like a song carried by the evening wind. To the villagers, she looked like a woman who had everything under control. They often saw her walking to the market with her basket, greeting people with kindness, never raising her voice, never showing anger. But what they didn't know was that her heart carried wounds no one could see. Behind the walls of her home, Imani lived in chains that were not made of iron but of fear. Her husband, Musa, was a man whose temper could light up like fire at the smallest spark. He was respected by some in the village because of his boldness and his loud voice, but those who looked closer saw the darkness in his eyes. Inside the house, Musa's pride turned into cruelty. A misplaced word, a late meal, or even silence from Imani could turn into a reason for his anger. He would shout, slam doors, and raise his hand without hesitation. For Imani, her home, which was supposed to be a shelter, became more like a prison where she walked on eggshells every single day. Yet, even in the middle of her pain, Imani carried herself with grace. She never let her son Jabari go without food. She wiped away her tears quickly so he wouldn't see them, though sometimes her bruises spoke louder than her smile. She prayed quietly at night, asking God for strength, asking for a miracle, asking for peace. In the mornings, she dressed herself neatly and covered her pain with dignity, because she believed one day her suffering would not be in vain. Imani's silence was not weakness, it was survival. But deep inside, a storm was building, and it was only a matter of time before her story would change forever. Do you want me to keep going with Outline 3, The Little Eyes That Watched, in the same style and expand it to around 350 words too? Jabari was only a little boy, but his heart carried a weight far too heavy for his small shoulders. When the shouting started, he would run to the corner of the room or hide behind the wooden door, peeking through the cracks with wide, frightened eyes. He watched his father raise his hand against his mother, the sound of the slap echoing louder than thunder in his young ears. Every strike made his tiny fists clench tighter, as if his small body was begging him to do something. But his legs were too short, his arms too weak, and his voice too small. The only thing he could do was cry silently, tears rolling down his cheeks as he wished the nightmare would stop. Sometimes, Jabari would press his hands to his ears to block the sound of his mother's cries, but the images never left his mind. He saw the bruises, the way his mother tried to smile at him afterward, as if nothing had happened. That smile hurt him even more, because he knew it was not real. At night, when the house became quiet, Jabari would curl up beside Imani, his little hands touching her face as if to promise her comfort. He would whisper in his small voice, "Mama, when I grow big, I will protect you." Those words were born from pain, but they planted a seed deep inside his heart. Each tear that fell watered that seed, and though Jabari was still a child, he was already building a silent vow. He promised himself that no matter how long it took, he would grow strong enough to stop the monster that lived under their roof. What Musa thought was fear in his son's eyes was actually a fire slowly being lit. A fire that one day would burn brighter than his father's cruelty. Jabari didn't know it yet, but those nights of helpless tears were shaping him into the man who would one day turn his pain into strength, and his silence into justice. Do you want me to expand Outline 4, The Public Beating, next in the same detailed, emotional, viral style? It was a warm evening in Nyamra, the kind where neighbors sat outside their homes, chatting and sharing stories as the sun slowly faded. Children played in the dusty paths, laughter filling the air. But that night the laughter was cut short. Musa stormed out of his house, dragging Imani by the arm as if she were nothing more than a burden. His face was twisted with anger, his voice loud enough for the whole village to hear. Without shame, without fear, he raised his hand and struck her in the open, right in front of everyone. The sound of the slap froze the air. People gasped, mothers pulled their children closer, and men shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to step forward. In Nyamra, interfering in another man's household was seen as disrespect, even when that household was filled with pain. Musa knew this, and it made him bold. He laughed cruelly, proud of his power, proud that no one would stop him. Little Jabari stood just a few steps away, his small body shaking. His eyes widened in horror as he saw his mother fall to the ground. "Mama!" he cried, his tiny voice echoing through the night. He tried to run to her, but Musa's towering figure blocked the way. The boy's cries grew louder, but Musa only turned and sneered at him. "Cry all you want, boy," he said with a laugh. "You cannot save her." His words cut deeper than his blows. The neighbors whispered among themselves, some turning their eyes away, others watching with pity but doing nothing. To them, it was just another evening of Musa's rage. But to Jabari, it was the moment that carved a scar into his soul. He would never forget the sight of his mother lying in the dust, the sound of his own cries, and his father's mocking laughter. That night something inside the little boy broke, but at the same time something new was born. The determination that one day, this story would not end with fear. Do you want me to move forward with Outline 5, A Mother's Silent Strength, in the same deep emoji? That night, after the dust had settled and the neighbors had gone back into their homes pretending not to have seen anything, Imani sat quietly with Jabari in her arms. Her face was swollen, her lips trembling, but she still managed to hold her son close, rocking him gently as if she could shield him from the world. Jabari's tears soaked her dress, his small hands gripping her tightly as though he feared she would slip away. She brushed her fingers through his hair and forced a faint smile, though her heart was heavy. In the silence of that dark room, she whispered words that would never leave his memory. "One day, my son, you will grow strong enough to protect what is right." Her voice was soft but steady, carrying more strength than her bruised body could ever show. Jabari looked up at her with wide, tear-filled eyes, not fully understanding the weight of her words, but feeling them settle deep inside his soul. To him, she was not just his mother, she was his reason to be brave. Imani's strength was not the loud kind. She didn't shout, she didn't fight back, and she never cursed the man who hurt her. Her strength lived in her ability to survive, to endure, to protect her son's spirit, even when hers was being crushed. Every day, she rose from her pain and still managed to cook, to clean, to smile at her boy, as if she could teach him that love was stronger than hate. She was broken, yet unshaken in her duty as a mother. For Jabari, those moments became seeds planted deep within his heart. The sound of her whisper, the sight of her battered face still holding love, turned into a promise he made to himself, that one day, he would not let her down. Imani didn't know it then, but her quiet strength was shaping a warrior. Her suffering was molding her son into the very protector she prayed for. And in the silence of that night, while Musa slept without care, a mother and child silently built the foundation of a future that would one day turn pain into justice. As the years passed, Jabari grew taller, his shoulders broader, but inside him the little boy who once hid behind the door never disappeared. The memories of his father's rage clung to him like shadows, following him wherever he went. He could still hear the cries of his mother, still see her bruised face, still feel the helplessness of being too small to stop the violence. These memories did not fade with time. They became scars carved deep into his spirit. Every scar reminded him of one truth: he would never allow any woman, especially his mother, to suffer in silence again. At school, Jabari was quiet, often lost in thought. While other boys laughed and played, he carried a seriousness beyond his age. Teachers noticed the fire in his eyes whenever anyone mentioned family. His friends could not understand why he grew angry when they joked about women or mocked girls. What they didn't know was that Jabari's anger was not just about the joke, it was about a lifetime of pain stored inside him. He had seen what disrespect looked like, and he swore he would never be that kind of man. At night he often replayed his mother's words. "One day, you'll grow strong enough to protect what is right." Those words became his compass. Each time he remembered her whisper, it pushed him harder to become better, stronger and braver. The thought of her suffering fueled him more than food ever could. Even as a teenager, when his father mocked him and tried to belittle him, Jabari kept silent on the outside. But inside he was building strength stone by stone. His scars were not signs of weakness, they were lessons. They taught him empathy, courage, and the hunger for justice. While Musa believed his son would grow up broken and fearful, Jabari was quietly becoming the opposite. The pain that once crushed him was shaping him into a shield, a protector, and a fighter. And though no one else could see it yet, Jabari was preparing for the day when those scars would no longer remind him. Jabari grew into a young man with a body built from discipline and a heart built from pain. While other boys spent their free time playing games or chasing fun, Jabari spent his hours training. He joined sports at school, running until his lungs burned, lifting weights until his muscles trembled, and learning martial arts with a focus that surprised even his coaches. To the world it looked like he was simply ambitious, a boy chasing strength for glory. But deep inside, Jabari knew the truth. Every punch he threw carried the weight of his mother's tears. Every push-up was a silent promise. Every drop of sweat was a vow he made to the little boy who once cried helplessly behind the door. He never spoke about it to anyone. Not to his friends, not even to Imani. To them, he was just a hard-working young man. But in his mind, he was preparing for something bigger than medals or trophies. He was preparing for a day only he could see. A day when the fear that had haunted him for years would finally be broken. He imagined standing between his father and his mother, no longer a trembling child but a man strong enough to fight back. That vision fueled him more than any applause ever could. There were nights when Jabari trained alone, punching the air, sweat dripping down his face, his jaw clenched in silence. He could almost hear his father's mocking laugh in the wind, and each strike became an answer to that laughter. He wasn't training just to fight, he was training to reclaim his mother's dignity, to heal the boy inside him, and to prove that pain could be turned into power. With every year his body became sharper, faster, and stronger. But more than that, his spirit hardened with purpose. No one knew what was burning inside Jabari. They only saw determination. But Jabari knew this was not just training. This was preparation for destiny. Shall I move forward with Outline 8, Musa's arrogance grows? In the same heartfelt, viral style? Years went by, but Musa remained the same cruel man he had always been. Time softened most people but not him. If anything, it only made his arrogance grow stronger. He carried himself through the village with pride, as if the fear he planted in his household was proof of his strength. Whenever Imani walked quietly beside him, he mocked her in public, calling her weak and useless. People looked away, pretending not to hear, but deep down, everyone knew Musa's mouth was sharper than his fists. For Imani, every word was another wound, but she kept her silence, choosing dignity over arguments. With Jabari, Musa's cruelty took a different form. He no longer raised his hand against him often, but he never stopped mocking him. "You'll always be a boy," he would sneer, laughing loudly. "You are nothing but your mother's shadow. Weakness runs in your blood." Musa believed that fear had carved itself so deeply into his son's heart that Jabari would never stand against him. He saw the quiet in Jabari's eyes and mistook it for cowardice, never realizing it was the calm of a storm gathering strength. Even as Jabari grew taller, stronger, and more confident in his own body, Musa laughed at him, convinced that power belonged only to fathers, never to sons. "You can run, you can lift, you can punch the air all day," Musa would say, smirking. "But when you stand before me, you will always bow your head." His words dripped with pride, feeding his belief that he was untouchable. What Musa never understood was that his arrogance was building his own downfall. Every insult hardened Jabari's resolve. Every cruel laugh reminded Jabari of why he was training. Musa thought he was breaking his son's spirit, but in truth, he was sharpening it. He didn't know that the boy he dismissed as powerless was silently preparing to become the man who would one day turn his arrogance into regret. Do you want me to continue with Outline 9, The Breaking Point, in the same emotional viral store? The day finally came when years of silence could no longer hold back the storm inside Jabari. Musa had returned home in one of his dark moods, his voice thundering through the house as he hurled insults at Imani. She stood quietly, her eyes lowered the way she always had. But this time Musa's anger grew hotter. He lifted his hand to strike her, just as he had done countless times before. But before his hand could fall, another hand stopped him. Strong, firm, unshaking. It was Jabari. No longer the small boy who once cried in corners, he now stood tall, his shoulders broad, his eyes steady. He stepped between his mother and his father, his body forming a shield she had prayed for all her life. For the first time, Musa looked into his son's face and saw no fear. The trembling voice of a child was gone. What came out instead was the voice of a man hardened by years of pain. "You will not touch her again." The words cut through the air like a blade. Amani gasped softly, her heart pounding, unable to believe what she was witnessing. Musa froze, his pride wounded by the defiance. He let out a mocking laugh, trying to mask his shock. "So the boy thinks he is a man now," he sneered. "Do you think you can stop me?" But Jabari did not flinch. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked onto the man who had haunted his childhood. Every muscle in his body carried the strength of years spent preparing for this very moment. The little boy who once hid behind doors had finally stepped into the light. For Musa, it was supposed to be just another night of dominance. For Jabari, it was the moment he had been waiting for all his life. The breaking point had arrived and there was no turning back. "Do you want me to continue with Outline 10? A fight that shook Nyamra?" In the same emotional and viral storytelling flow? Musa's laughter filled the room, sharp and cruel, echoing off the walls. He looked at Jabari and shook his head, convinced that the boy who once cowered in corners, who once hid behind doors, could never stand against him. "Do you really think you can stop me?" he sneered, his voice full of mocking pride. But this time everything had changed. The boy he had beaten in front of the village, the same child who had cried helplessly while Musa struck his mother, had grown into a man shaped by pain, discipline, and determination. Jabari didn't say a word at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke louder than any threat. His fists were steady, his movements controlled, his eyes burning with the fire of years spent preparing for this moment. He remembered every insult, every slap, every tear his mother had shed, and he carried them all with him into the fight. Musa swung first, his anger giving him speed, but Jabari dodged with precision, a skill born from countless hours of training. The fight that followed shook the very walls of their home. Each strike, each block, each movement carried more than just physical force. It carried the weight of justice long denied. Jabari moved with a purpose that Musa could not understand. The father had relied on fear for so long, believing it was enough to control his family. But fear could not compete with strength born of love, pain, and determination. Outside, neighbors began to gather, drawn by the noise. They had known Musa as a man who could never be challenged, a man untouchable. But now they watched in awe as his arrogance collided with the power of a son who had been forged in the fires of his cruelty. The fight was not just physical. It was the reversal of years of injustice. Every punch Jabari threw was a statement, every block a declaration. No longer would fear rule this home. By the end, the room was heavy with the echoes of struggle. Musa realized too late that the boy he had thought powerless had become. Jabari's fists moved with a power that seemed almost unstoppable. Each strike carried the weight of years he had spent hiding in corners, crying silently while his mother suffered. Every blocked punch, every controlled blow was a release of the anger, fear, and frustration that had built inside him since childhood. The hands that once shook at the sight of his father's raised hand now struck with precision and strength, channeling not hatred but justice. With each movement, Musa staggered, his arrogance crumbling under the force of a son who refused to be broken any longer. Musa's laughter had long since faded, replaced by shock and disbelief. He had believed his power was absolute, that fear would always keep his family under control. But now the very boy he had humiliated and tormented was turning the tables, showing him the consequences of a life built on cruelty. Jabari moved like a storm, relentless but measured, making sure every strike sent a clear message. This was the end of fear, the end of silence. Outside the house, the village gathered quietly. No one spoke. The people who had once whispered about Musa's dominance watched in stunned silence, as the man they had feared for so long was brought to his knees by the son he had underestimated. Mothers held their children close, fathers whispered to one another, and even the wind seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the shift in power. Inside, Imani watched, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped over her mouth. Relief, pride, and disbelief overwhelmed her all at once. The years of suffering, the nights of silent prayers, the hope she had quietly carried for her son, all of it was unfolding before her eyes. Jabari's strength was not just physical. It was the embodiment of her courage, her patience, and her love. By the time the fight ended, Musa was on the floor, defeated, broken, and powerless. The boy he had thought weak had become a force of justice, and the village, silent no more, would neave. The quiet streets of Nyamra were alive with whispers, hushed but urgent. Neighbors peeked from behind windows and doorways, unable to believe what they were seeing. The man who had once ruled his home and intimidated the entire village with his temper was now on the ground, crawling and pleading for mercy. Musa, who had once laughed at cries and bruises, was begging from the very boy he had tormented for years. The same little boy who had trembled in fear, hiding behind doors while his mother suffered, now stood over him calm and unshakable. Mothers pressed their children close, fathers shook their heads in disbelief, and even the teenagers who had grown up hearing tales of Musa's cruelty whispered in awe. The balance of power had shifted so completely that the entire village felt the weight of it. People who had feared to speak up before now understood the truth. No one is untouchable, and courage can come from the most unexpected places. Every eye was fixed on Jabari, not just for his strength, but for the way he carried himself with purpose, not anger, with dignity, not cruelty. Musa's pleas were desperate, raw, and filled with the shame he had never known before. He tried to find his voice, but it faltered under the weight of years he had spent abusing those who could not fight back. Jabari listened, silent, letting his father's own conscience deliver the punishment that words or violence alone could not. For the villagers, it was a lesson carved into their hearts. Respect cannot be forced by fear, and abuse always leaves a mark, even if it takes years for justice to come. Imani, standing behind her son, wiped tears from her face. She had watched helplessly for so long, and now she finally saw the justice she had prayed for, delivered by the very hands of the son she had raised with love and patience. Jabari had become the embodiment of hope, courage, and resilience, and the villagers would carry the story of this night for generations to come. A night when Imani's knees felt weak as she sank to the ground, tears spilling freely down her face. But these were not tears of fear, nor of sorrow, nor of helplessness. They were tears of relief, tears of a heart finally unburdened after years of pain. She reached out and pulled Jabari close, burying her face in his chest. His strong arms wrapped around her, steady and reassuring, and for the first time in so long, she felt completely safe. The weight she had carried for years, the fear, the shame, the quiet suffering, began to wash away with each trembling breath. Her tears told stories words never could. They spoke of nights spent crying silently while Musa raged, of mornings where she forced herself to smile for her son, of whispered prayers that somehow justice would come. And now she realized that justice had arrived, not through outsiders, not through luck, but through the very boy she had nurtured, guided, and loved. Jabari had become the man she had always hoped he would be, the protector of what was right, the defender of the innocent. For Jabari, holding his mother felt like holding the entire world in his hands. He remembered every slap, every insult, every moment of fear that had once held him down. Now he was not only the son of Imani, he was the deliverer of peace, the living proof that pain could be transformed into strength. Her sobs against his chest fueled his own sense of triumph and fulfillment, reminding him that all his training, all his patience, all his silent preparation had led to this moment. Around them the village watched quietly, many with tears of their own, understanding that this was more than just a personal victory. It was a story of hope, courage, and the power of resilience. And in that embrace, mother and son shared a bond that could never be broken, a moment that would live in their hearts forever. Imani's tears were not just relief, they were the final chapter of years of suffering and the first chapter of a new life built on love core. Musa sat on the dusty floor, his body aching, his pride shattered. Every bruise, every cut, every ache was a reminder of the years he had spent trying to control his family through fear and violence. The man who once walked with his head high, who believed himself untouchable, now stared at the son he had tormented, and for the first time he felt powerless. The power he had used to dominate, to intimidate, to break the spirit of those he loved, had returned to him in a way he could never escape. He tried to speak, to make excuses, to regain some shred of dignity, but the words caught in his throat. No boast, no lie, no anger could undo what had been done. He had underestimated the boy who once trembled at his hand, the son who had silently carried every slap, every insult, every tear, and transformed it into strength. Moose's mind raced, and for the first time, he understood the weight of the suffering he had caused. The realization burned deeper than any physical pain, the knowledge that he had almost destroyed the very people who had loved him, and that now, his own arrogance had become the instrument of his downfall. Around him, the village watched silently. No one stepped forward to help him. The fear that once kept them in line had been replaced with awe and respect for Jabari. Moose's shame was complete. He saw the truth in Amani's eyes, the quiet strength that had survived years of abuse, and in Jabari's steady gaze, he saw a force that could no longer be broken. As he lay there, bruised and humbled, Musa felt a sinking weight in his chest. Pride, control, and power, the very things he had clung to, had crumbled into nothing. He realized that violence never creates respect, only fear, and that fear can be overcome. The man who had once been a tyrant was now just a man, facing the consequences of every cruel act, every harsh word, every moment of unchecked anger. And in that moment, he finally understood that the strength of a family lies not in domination, but Heel geverpsel givne orjas dat schijmers der ooit zither vanafstemmen en ik vaak het zilly rupe hadden gesonica. Snel we fit. Heel as der ooit slor afne on shumme. Slois die dus net in eepskin al wat die toe. Heel me kan zit bergster om zo uit der volve. Hij slorger was mij afzie wat zit zag nevel van opners. Dacht in de celle dat je verwende war man. Steder who no we redder absnish der grinne. Of avers swear ooit zilotzer oxer there no. Hurt patch do no snit kauna snare the murthagus, and I were beep on the cats are off knit in rope snares knit sah, but when I been the guest the hair of scraps are net fall least and get the whoop, hurry if the one blood fell. Snamwam said this deli enough, that's nerve knit out knit sir air from the last finger fuss was re, and one nervent I sheep, but our march in the last night's not sir his, he no murf, or shit on, it got her from smack near church and his alley, and I share him back the wear off, but that goes the old night. Seal my friend the eerste there with a beself staatser af. Her swelkners lusher lesser them. Fly ashter and her was there was on to get up. My ashter of Nima was no last same sweep. Sheester van Bicknell lister when the cellar still live it. More her and the Lord on so snished it. Her thy gets valor thought be rear of Bishnam. Set such nit efforts our Richter Nivel. Small sicker than the Navi and Yosh. Sir that raps near verbs. Ducks line no one know where them zitted caster bowhnas. Ngertjes en eefner heel with the zero slot line these lurks assume I better soaps now what I hope. Snail is there next there. Oh, full miss him a day. And I seen I'm at such all on the wear of it. Say, I will for a peoch, and snitch the snake bear my and the fell now yet, Admer.